This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. Vancouver lawyers Dumal and Boscovich. The people who are supposed to put us to sleep, I'm not talking here about the CBC or Parliament, the anesthesiologists have been told as of Friday by a local judge, no, you must not go on strike, you will harm people who need these surgeries. That is an interesting little tale when you also look at the fact that, oh, it's 2:30, the teachers must be on strike. And the BCGEU, the Government Employees Union, which has not had a labor action really in almost 25 years, in a quarter of a century, and they're contemplating. So this being, I believe, the most contentious province in the Federation, there's always something interesting going on in labor land, and so who better to get an unbiased view than the president of the BC Federation of Labor, our old buddy Jim Sinclair. Hi, Jim.
How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Great.
Let's talk about some of these first before we get on to some other issues. You're not totally involved in all of these, but the anesthesiologists, what do they want? More money, more ether? What do they want?
Well, it usually comes back to somewhere to money along the way, right?
Oddly enough.
And I think it's also complicated by the fact that they're part of a larger bargaining unit, but they want to bargain on their own. And doctors, by the way, to be honest, are a very strong union. They'd be the last to say they're a union, but they're a union. And they negotiate collectively for their wages and working conditions.
BCMA.
And they do a very good job.
Yes, of course.
Very good job for doing that. They have a lot of power and they use it when they want to.
Yeah.
And they have gotten some very high wage increases over the years.
So you see no reason why anesthesiologists shouldn't be well paid as well?
Well, they should be well paid within the limitations, but everybody should be well paid. You know, I think that's the bottom line for me, is where I come from, is that everybody deserves, if they go to work every day, they should be out of poverty, not in poverty.
Well, let's talk
And I think we should worry about the bottom a little more than we worry about the top, because we spent way too much time at the top the last 10 years.
Well, speaking of bottoms and tops, BC Teachers Fed, as usual, fighting with the government. Susan Lambert sat right there 2 months ago, and I asked her, will there ever be a time when BC Teachers Fed is not fighting the government in power? And she said, no, that's not true, but it seems to me they always are. But look, the BC government has appointed a mediator, and this man is being paid, correct me if I'm wrong, $2,000 a day?
Well, honestly, let's not confuse something. They appointed a fellow to do a job.
Yes.
To call him a mediator would be a stretch of the imagination.
Why?
Because he's the former head, and a very good one, I'm told, head of UNBC.
Yes.
That doesn't make him a mediator.
Yes.
A mediation is a skill, as he would argue, being the president of the university is a skill, being an administrator.
Yes.
And so he's not a mediator. I don't think actually any legitimate mediator would have taken the job.
Why?
Well, because the deck is rigged. When a mediator goes in, they want, we will see what you want, see what I want, and we'll argue about it, and they have the freedom to try to make us have a deal. This has already got the rules set on what he has to decide on. The government predisposes, sort of like the Boston Bruins, right? They go into the last game 7, and they get to appoint the referee, okay? It's their referee, and then they write a script saying, you got to call these penalties. And that's kind of like what happened here, and that's why they're angry. The teachers all along said, a mediator's okay, but this is not a mediator with any mediation experience. He was, he did become famous for donating to the Liberal Party, but, other people have done that too.
But $2,000 a day, come on. I mean,
ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. Okay, now look, I think equally ridiculous, to be fair, is asking for a 15% raise over 3 years. That's a bit stiff, isn't it?
Well, okay, 5 and 5 is what they're asking for.
I know, but even that's pretty rich.
Okay, but if you don't ask for something, you don't get anything.
Yes.
You start here, the government started at 0. That's a bit stingy, don't you think?
Okay.
And they were at 0 15 weeks ago, 25 weeks ago when they started bargaining. And at the end of it all, they were still at 0. At least the teachers moved somewhere. And by the way, they would have moved farther. Now, the BCGU is in bargaining, and they've asked for the cost of living plus 1% to catch up.
Which is kind of reasonable.
Which is kind of reasonable, but that's 4% a year over the next 2 years. So, I mean, the bottom line is, why should anybody be going backwards when the government feels free to raise hydro rates, MSP premiums, other costs all over the place for people, seniors care, everything else is going up. Why would not people's wages continue to go up? And the real problem is, for many years, wages haven't kept up. So people are poor.
Yeah, but let me ask you this. You have been involved in the labor movement most of your grown-up life, other than the few years you were an ink-stained wretch on this side of the table, in some obscure place. Thank God.
Yeah, we never called Nelson obscure. David, come on now.
Okay, and on the one hand, we have the BCGEU, and those are lots of different kinds of people. They're drivers. They sell products. They're prison guards.
Yes.
There are a lot of different occupations, right?
Yes.
Okay. Those people have had relative calm for a quarter of a century with governments. They've negotiated contracts. They haven't been on strike. In contrast, and I want you to try to help us understand this, why are the teachers so constantly, or at least the Federation, I don't believe the teachers are, but the Federation, so virulent, so caught up all the time?
Well, I just want to say that I think it's perception as much as reality many times. The BCG has had many fights with the government, including over the privatization of liquor stores. There was a huge fight, a huge campaign that they took on. They bargained a number of collective agreements. When I took over this job, they were involved in a huge strike in the community and social service sector, the lowest paid sector. And that strike went on for 3 months. So it's just a perception. Now, teachers are very strong advocates for kids. Let's get this right. They're not making widgets or cutting down trees or doing that.
I know.
They actually go in there every day and they have to deal with kids.
Yeah.
And they feel very strongly about it. You have to be a teacher and do it properly.
Yeah.
And so they're very strong about that. And what we've seen for 10 years, of course, is the funding envelope shrinking. We've seen resources being cut back to teachers. We saw their contracts torn up. There used to be some basic rules. They're angry because the government came in and tore up their contract.
I remember that.
They took out the class size and composition rules, which protected not just the teachers and their
So 1990 or something, or 91.
No. That was in 2002.
2001. Okay.
2002, the Liberals took over and came in and tore all that up.
Yeah.
And so they were angry about that. They saw education deteriorating. They went to court. Supreme Court found Gordon Campbell, guilty.
I remember.
Guilty of tearing up those collective agreements. So then they come back.
What's
and what
the
happens?
consequence?
Well, the consequence is they come back to the government. The government comes back to the teachers and says, okay, let's talk about this. We'll give you this amount of money compared to what was there before. And when they brought in the legislation last week, they took out the very small restraints that were left. So now there are no class size restraints after grade 3, and there are no class size restraints on the number of kids with special needs. And that, frankly, is wrong, not for teachers, yes, for them too, but wrong for the system. Education is it. In today's modern economy, you're not walking out of grade 10 with a learning disability into a good paying job. That's not going to happen. So we really need the education system to work well, and we need a government to work with teachers and other education providers, special needs people and assistants, to make it work. Our kids depend on this.
I know you're a great fan of journalism and of writers, and you followed the history of such. You will remember Walter Stewart was one of the great Canadian writers. And what was the phrase he used to use? Something like, it wasn't honest decency, but it was something like that, or good, honest common sense. Where has that gone? Why can we not get someone, we both sort of agree that this so-called mediator probably isn't the right guy, but why can't we get someone to sit down and say, look, you two, meaning the current Gesundheit, the current government and the BC Fed, come on, folks, let's adult up here. Let's settle this. Let's clean this up. Let's agree to something.
Well, the problem is you have to have both parties willing to agree. And right now the government has a basic position. We're not changing anything or giving anything, even after 2 years of zeros for everybody. And so you've got to have both parties willing. Now, a mediator could go in there and find a solution. I believe that.
Yes.
But they can if one party says, I'm never going to move. And the problem with that is...
Do you really believe that they're going to do that?
No, the government's not going to move. No, I don't believe they are. And they've written the mediator so that he actually has to rule on the concessions they want to take, the things they want to take away from the teachers. So it's not fair. It's not working, and you got to be fair. This government will not put an arbitrator in. They will not let a third party decide, and that's wrong. Because sometimes, I agree, the kids need a third party. They need somebody to come in and make a decision and try to help us find a solution. Both sides need that. And that's what we need to know.
Is your sense that 90% of the human beings who teach in public schools are behind the BC Fed?
The BC Federation of, the BC Teachers Federation?
Yes,
Yeah.
BC Teachers Fed.
Yeah, I am.
Because I hear from lots of teachers who say they hate
their own union.
Listen, everybody has to complain against the union at times,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
when they're in a fight, okay?
Yeah.
And some people just are uncomfortable with having a fight. But
Yes.
generally speaking, don't forget, the reason they're a union, the reason there's even negotiations is Bill Vander Zalm. Because Bill Vander Zalm came into power and said, you know what? Those teachers don't want to be in a union. They'll be in an association. So he let them take a vote. And the vote was whether to be in an association or to be in a union.
Hello.
And you had a choice.
Yeah.
And so 77 locals voted.
Yeah.
And 77 locals voted to join a union.
So,
So Bill Vander Zalm actually gave them collective bargaining rights at the table.
so you have him to thank.
Well,
What
yes,
an
obviously.
irony. What an irony.
But he actually, but people will say, why do they do this? Well, because they're allowed to, because Bill Vander Zalm said they should have the right to bargain.
You show on this morning's website, it's very interesting to always go to the BC Fed website because you can keep track of what boxing matches are going on. And you're listed 5 strikes and lockouts listed today.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, there's very few strikes and lockouts. To be very blunt with you, David,
Yeah.
10 years ago, 15 years ago, there were a lot more strikes. It got harder to have
How are
them.
we doing compared to other provinces?
Well, I don't know about other provinces, but I'm sure that we're fairly low too. All it takes is for one big strike to change the numbers dramatically, okay?
Yes.
One labor dispute with 30,000 people, that's a huge number of person days lost, okay?
You don't sound like you hold out a lot of hope for this teachers' settlement in any way.
Well, I don't know if it's not about hope.
Yeah.
I'm not optimistic they're going to come to a place where both
Yeah,
sides will
yeah.
agree. No, I'm not. And I think the history shows that the government hasn't been willing to deal with people in that way. But we'll see. At the end of the day, maybe that will happen. That would be a good thing
I
for
hope
education.
so. Yes.
Well, I think that actually, in the polling we did, okay, when we asked the public, should the government appoint a mediator, unbiased mediator, 80%. Should they refer the matter to arbitration, which the teacher said, by the way, first time they ever said that, give it to a third party, we'll go back to work, and we'll live with whatever they decide.
Wow.
Government lives with it, they'll live with it.
Yeah.
90% of British Columbians said, 89% said, we support that too.
Okay.
So, and actually the majority said they should get a cost of living pay increase as well. So the public's on side. They actually way more support teachers than they do Christy Clark and the Liberals in this situation.
We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, let's look at some other things. There are a couple of ongoing themes that you and the Federation have really stayed on track with that I am really pleased with, that I really love. We'll talk about that in a second. A quick break, folks. Remind you that davidberner.com is the site to go to, and we give our sponsors and friends a moment to say hello and offer their support for having this program here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Back in a minute. KCM Wealth Management. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. One of the problems with complicated modern society, although I'm sure it was always thus, is things happen, beautiful things or dreadful things, and we get excited about them for 4 minutes and then they slip away. They're no longer headlines. At least 2 of these stories have been going on for some time, and I'm pleased that our guest, Jim Sinclair and the BC Fed, have stayed on these 2 stories because someone, quite frankly, had to, and almost nobody else is. The stories, of course, are the Grant Patie story about this young lad who was killed working at a gas station, and Jim can explain all of that. And of course, the farm workers out in Abbotsford. There are two stories there: the mushroom workers, but also these women who were killed in a van accident. And Jim can tell you how he's followed up on it. Let's start with a Grant to Patie. How did that law? You were almost single-handedly responsible for getting that law in place, and then they killed it about 8 months ago. What happened?
So we lobbied, and to a large extent with the Patie family.
Yes.
They were amazing, okay?
Yes.
They put that grief and anger and change and wanted a legacy of changing things. So after years of lobbying and surveys of people who work at night and going to hearings after
We'll
hearings,
just refresh everybody.
Oh, yeah.
This kid was working at a gas
station, and somebody came in, stole some gasoline, and he went and chased the guy, got caught in the car, dragged under down the street, and murdered, basically killed by the car.
And he was working alone.
He was working alone, never been trained.
Yes.
And the last place he'd worked at, which you don't really hear much about, when he didn't catch the guy, then they wanted to dock his pay, okay? So, and that used to be this scene that happened. So we got together and said, how do we make this safe? Working alone at night is dangerous, and we have all these stats that show it's dangerous, more dangerous at night than in the daytime to work alone with cash. And so we made an agreement, all the families and us, we all got together and said, what should we do to change it? So we said 3 things. Pay before you pump, okay? So you have to pay before you pump. Take away this whole issue.
Fine.
That doesn't make them safer unless you chase them,
Yeah.
but it's still a good thing, okay?
Yeah.
So we did that. The second thing we said was, you shouldn't work alone at night. It's scary working alone at night, and by the way, you're more likely to be robbed if you're working alone than not. People don't rob when there's customers, they wait till you're alone. So, or put a barrier in. Lots of gas stations you go to now, you go up, and if you want your chips and pop and cigarettes at 3 o'clock in the morning, you put your money in the window, and then he gives you the stuff out. He or she is sitting there, and they're at least protected from people coming in and trying to rob them.
Right, okay.
And so we had a big campaign, and we won.
Yes.
The board agreed with us.
Yes.
The only problem was the employers went crazy. They said, no, we don't want to do this. Now, don't get me wrong. Lots of employers have 2 people at night.
Yes.
Lots of people have those windows. So we're not talking about the best employers here. They're already following those rules, and many of them did it before the law became a law. But the ones that didn't and didn't want to pay the extra person or put a window in, they fought it, including Max Milk and enough of the convenience stores.
Oh, really?
Plus the liquor stores went very heavy on this, and they lobbied the government, and they went in and they reversed their decision. And so now, yes, you have to have a barrier or 2 people, or they made a third category, have a camera that looks at you so somebody takes a picture of you being robbed, and a button that you press and hope somebody show up.
Not good enough.
Not good enough.
No.
Absolutely not. So that's where we're at right now. Now this is going to come into effect in another week, and we're going to plan some
Whose
actions.
government was that?
The Liberals did this. The Liberals did this.
Which
Gordon
Liberal?
Campbell.
Okay.
This was Gordon Campbell, and they were lobbied very strong. There was a number. I heard this from people inside the cabinet. A number of cabinet ministers were furious at this because some of the small business people were mad.
Yeah.
But honestly, again, why should we reward bad behavior? This law that was brought in just brought the industry standard up to where the best ones already were. The good gas stations, the good convenience stores, the ones that were actually having 2 people.
Why should anyone, especially youngsters, have their lives be put at risk
For $50.
For $50, for employment, for minimum wage?
And why should a society that expects to get their pop at 4 o'clock in the morning expect some kid or new immigrant to put their life at risk?
Yeah.
So we're fighting to get that
Which
changed
reminds
back.
me, by the way, who in all these notes I read in the last few hours wants liquor stores? Is it BCGEU wants liquor stores open on Sundays?
Yes.
Yeah. Just run that past me.
Okay, very quickly.
It's a sidebar, but
It's a sidebar, but I mean, basically, they're publicly run.
Yes.
We make a lot more money off them than the one down the street, and the workers usually get paid a lot more money, and they might have a pension plan or 2. Or a dental plan. Anyway, so if you open on Sunday, you can make up to $150 million more for the public. Why wouldn't you? I'd rather go to a public liquor store. In fact, I always go, but.
Yeah, okay.
That's a sidelight.
Yeah, it's a sidebar. But
Now, of course, the private ones don't want that because Sunday's probably their busiest days.
Of course.
But back to Grant the Patie. I mean, I know the family is very upset. I know that a number of people are upset. A lot of young people worked on this campaign are upset, and so we're going to keep fighting. It takes time. It is discouraging, though, to get all the hearings, to go through a year of hearings all over the province, to have over 80 or 90 people show up and make presentations, to have the board rule in favor, and then have the employer lobby turn it over. It does get discouraging.
just like that.
Yep.
Who do you have to nail to get this? The
Well,
premier?
you probably have to change the government. In all fairness, you probably. I mean, but this board isn't going to change it now because they've already changed it the other way. We could lobby the board, but they've made up their mind to water this down.
Okay, let's go out to Abbotsford. I remember vividly this dreadful story of these women in a van, 17 people in a van. They're sitting on soap boxes, on cardboards. There's no seat belts and so on. Guy skids off the road. 3 of them are killed.
Yeah.
And what I remember most vividly, Jim, is that the day after this was headline news, you were there and you told me they were still doing the same thing.
Yes. So 3 days after that event, I went to the farm, the greenhouse, where these people were going to work that day.
Yeah.
By a labor contractor. So it wasn't that owner himself. The day before, the owner was on the radio saying, well, it's not my fault. I'm not responsible for these people and how they get to work. I pay the contractor and he brings them, okay? I would never do that. So I thought, I'm just going to go out and sit by his farm. I was going to a meeting actually to talk about this, and I said, oh, where's the farm? So we drove out. I was sitting there. I got out of the car, talked to some of the women that were working there.
Yeah.
And they said it was okay to work there.
Yeah.
And they were going to another place.
Yeah.
And as they were getting ready to go to the other place, the owner came out, so we buggered off.
Yeah.
And I left and
Yeah.
said, okay, we won't get in your way, because you
Yeah.
don't seem talking to the union guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I watched them, and they got to the van to put them in the van. And they got to the last person, and there was no seat for them, okay? Now, this is 3 days after 3 people died with no seatbelts, okay?
Right.
And so the woman knows that we're sitting there watching, okay?
Yes.
So she doesn't get in. She hesitates. And the guy yells at her, get in the
Yeah.
car, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I watch her get into the car and sit around and sit on the corner of the seat. And they get ready to drive away. And what that told me was there was no fear in those employers.
Because
3 days, because there was no
there's
enforcement.
No government oversight, right?
No enforcement. No enforcement. In fact, there was a big crackdown for about a month.
Yes.
And they took 45% of the vans off the road because they were totally wrecked vans. They were driving for people that weren't safe.
Jim, maybe my perception on this is not accurate, but it seems to me that there's no enforcement in a lot of areas in British Columbia where workers are concerned.
Particularly marginal workers, okay? Particularly where there's no union, where there's no voice for workers, where workers don't have a safety committee.
Yes.
You know, I mean, in a lot of cases, it's up to workers to enforce the rules because there are not enough inspectors.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a union, it's very hard to do that, okay? To speak up to your employer. Even in a union place, we find people don't want to do that. But in non-union places, it's virtually impossible.
But to save money,
Yeah.
the government has consistently cut back on inspectors,
You know,
observers.
it went like this. It went like this for about 5 years, way down. Then
Yes.
it started to pick up again as more and more of us started to complain about it. And even the people at the board went and looked at this and said, this is not acceptable. And so you've got more inspections starting to happen now. Some of the rates have come down. We're still killing as many people as we are. And you know, it's really outrageous because really the problem is that person that was driving that van got a fine of, I think, $2,000 or $2,500.
Oh my God.
That was it. The other
That was
person,
it.
the other person owned the company.
Yeah.
There was a fine of $69,000 from the board. That fine was never paid. He just closed up shop and started another business.
One of the central concerns.
they don't pay. They don't pay.
One of the
No
central
consequences.
concerns of the BC Federation of Labor has always been worker safety.
Right.
And one of the things I like about BC Fed is that you've made a point of being concerned about the safety of workers, whether or not they are union people, which I think is admirable and important.
Well, it's so important
Yeah.
to us. It's not just that we are magnanimous.
Yeah, yeah.
It's that we have to maintain everybody's standards or everybody's standards go down. It
Yeah.
only goes one way, up or down. And when there's too many people that don't have representation, don't. But it's partly our moral obligation.
So
It's our job.
So are we doing better than we
Yeah.
were doing 30 or 40 years ago?
Yes, we are in some areas. There's no doubt we are doing better.
When I first moved
Yep.
here, I was from the prairies. I was in my early 20s, and you weren't considered a man unless you had worked on a logger thing, or
Right.
you were So, but in
It's still
those
an
days, a
extreme-
lot of people
yeah.
were killed.
Still extremely dangerous job. We had
Yes.
not that long ago. Not that long ago, we lost I think 46 people in the forest industry in 1 year. Okay, you know it's a huge carnage out there, and we still lose well over 100 people. We're losing to asbestos. Occupation diseases are taking more and more people. As they get older, they're dying from a disease they caught in the worksite 20 years ago.
Wow.
So you have that. We just had a case where the guy went to jail for 60 days for contempt of court. Okay, why was he in contempt? Because he was fined 5 times by the WCB and didn't stop taking, and get this, he would go to rehab centers, okay?
Yes.
And he would pick up people as young as 14 years of age and take them to work and expose them to asbestos, which is a killer. We all know it's a killer, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And he did that with over 50 people, and he would hire himself out for cheap to take asbestos out of buildings and never report there was asbestos in the building. And so he got 60 days in jail, not for exposing those workers and potentially killing half of them, at least half of them, a 14-year-old kid.
But he's taking kids from rehab centers?
Yeah.
That's
Taking kids,
sick.
taking kids.
That's really sick, yeah.
And he gets 2 months in jail because of contempt, not because he's guilty of exposing those people. Now, if he took a gun on a work site,
Yeah.
swung the barrel around and shot 3 of them,
Yeah.
he'd go to jail tomorrow for the rest of his life. But that's what he did. And that's what we want now. We want if you are negligent, not if it's an accident and you've got a good safety record
Yes.
and you've done your job as an employer. I'm not after you. I still think you should be better. All these things are avoidable.
Yeah.
But if you, like this guy,
Yeah.
time after time ignores the order, continues to expose people, exploit kids, then you should go to jail for that. And there should be no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Go to jail. You kill workers, you go to jail.
We've had a couple of dreadful stories in the last 5 years about people bringing workers up from all kinds of places, from Mexico, from
Right.
further afield than that.
and really treating them like slaves from 5 centuries ago.
Well, the Kyra case of the silviculture workers, they weren't being paid. They were living in shambles. They didn't have no safety protection.
no water,
dangerous, no water, no food,
yeah,
nothing.
yeah.
No. And that guy is still free. He was never charged. He was actually charged for fraudulently signing safety forms, okay, in Revelstoke, but he never showed up in court. And so these workers, by the way, this is the problem with BC and the Liberals. Yeah. These people were ripped off for $250,000, okay?
Ouch.
That's what they found.
Yes.
Okay, $250,000. And if it hadn't been for the Fed and the legal people we had working, the public interest group that did all this work for free, they never would have got anywhere near that amount of money. But they're still waiting for half of it. They were working for you and me. They were working to do our public forests, to plant trees in our public forests under a government contract, but the government won't pay them the lost wages. It's up to that company that's gone away.
And being treated like garbage. Jim,
yes.
Always a great
pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Always fighting the good fight. Jim Sinclair, President of BC Federation of Labor. Folks, that's it for today. DavidBerner.com is the site to go to. And next week, Gail Sparrow, also an old friend, at one time chief of the Musqueam, but just being Gail now. But she's going to come on and talk about some really peculiar, dreadful things that are happening now. What one commentator has called the soft bigotry of low expectations. We'll explain all of that next week. Thank you for being with us here on Shaw Community Television Cable 4. Good night.